Most people who want to start a farm are about to choose the wrong type, a mistake that can cost a lot of money and years. Before I purchased this parcel here in Washington, I really had to think about what type of farm I wanted to build. Because timber, livestock, greenhouses, these are all completely different systems. You don't want to lock yourself into a farm that's not suited for your lifestyle. So, in this video, I'm going to be breaking down all the farming models, what they require, what they return, and to find out which one is specifically best fit for you. So let's get started. Before you choose a farm model, answer these 5 questions, which I call intent knobs. Your answers will narrow down which path actually fits you. The first is animals or no animals. Do you want daily responsibility, emergencies, illnesses? If that feels heavy, choose plants. If it feels meaningful, animals can fit. The second is workload shape. Do you want a steady daily rhythm or brutal seasonal pushes? Pick the cadence your life can sustain. There's no right or wrong answer for any of these, by the way, just personal preference. The third is problem style. Do you want to engineer control or work with nature's variability? Systems give control but demand management. Nature gives simplicity but it's less predictable. The fourth is optimization target. Livestock quality or long-term asset compounding. One favors simplicity, one favors scale and reinvestment. The biggest constraint is capital you can actually risk. Not how much you have, but how much you can lose without breaking your life. Undercapitalized farms don't fail from effort. They fail from thin margins and one bad hit. Before you go any further, have a real number in mind. Total capital you're willing to commit to, land, and setup. This number will help eliminate options faster than almost anything else. So with that out of the way, let's take ahead and look at the different types of farms. So remember to keep the intent knobs in the back of your head, and also also the constraint, which is the amount of money you're willing to spend. So the first one is livestock farming. So this is basically growing animals to sell their meat. And I think the biggest part of this is kind of like the farm owns part of your calendar, right? There's no real pause buttons because you're dealing with living organisms. When something goes wrong, response time is now and not later. Asset perspective, it's interesting. I think wealth usually doesn't come from like a clean monthly cash flow. It comes from controlling land and managing a herd that reproduces over time. Capital-wise, livestock tends to be lighter than most people expect, honestly, I think. Land costs are medium because you don't need prime crop ground. Initial infrastructure is low. Fencing, water, basic shelters, just that sort of stuff. But ongoing costs are high. Feed, labor, and all these different things never go away. Labor is also medium, but it's non-optional and daily matters. Livestock really differentiates in complexity. Think fewer technical systems to manage, but higher biological judgment. And I think here experience compounds faster than capital on this path, right? So like small operators with good judgment often outperform better funded ones who kind of underestimate the day-to-day reality, at least in my opinion. Main failure modes kind of like think about long, quiet stretches of winter where feed costs pile up, labor fatigue sets in, emotional weight of an illness or loss adds up. So these type of things can happen and go wrong. I think for the right type of person, this path is grounding and meaningful, but for the wrong person, it can get heavy quite fast. The next is the production of dairy and eggs. I think the core reality is continuous production, right? So these things don't wait. Output is expected every single day, and the system only works if you show up on time, every time. From an asset perspective, wealth comes from throughput and efficiency. So you're not compounding like on land and animals necessarily, you're basically running a production system where uptime matters. So income is tied directly to that kind of execution. Capital requirements because of the infra are meaningfully higher. So because land costs are kind of still medium, but the initial infrastructure involves things like milking systems, barn, housing, storage, sanitation. So these things can add up to quite a lot. Ongoing costs are also high: feed, labor, maintenance, and compliance. And complexity is mostly system complexity with tighter biological timing. I think burnout, thin margins, and downtimes in systems are kind of the risk here. And I think if you enjoy routine, structure, and running a tight operation, this path can be deeply satisfying. You want flexibility or seasonal breathing room? it's going to feel heavy fast. Field crops, I think, is what most people think of when they think of traditional agriculture. I think the reality of these is that you need a lot of scale. So field crops operate on thin margins, which means efficiency and acreage matter more than anything else. I think from an asset perspective, wealth compounds through land control and operational efficiency. It's not craft driven, it's a system and scales path. So it works when the math works across many acres. I think capital requirements reflect that, so land costs are high because this land competes directly with other large-scale uses. Initial infrastructure is medium, equipment, storage, and access, but ongoing operation costs are high. Seed, fertilizer, fuel, maintenance add up quickly. Labor intensity is lower day to day, but spikes hard during planting and harvest. I think complexity is kind of like technical systems and balanced with biological judgment, but optimization here I think favors like more than intuition. Experience helps, but I think acres matter more. I think the kind of core failure modes here come from inability to absorb volatility, like weather swings, input prices, or a single bad season kind of throw off farmers if they don't have enough acres. I think Path rewards people who think in systems, logistics, and long-term horizons. But if you enjoy operational planning and scaling efficiency, it's going to work quite well. If you want hands-on craft or daily management, I think this path can feel distant and impersonal. Next are orchards. The core reality here is kind of delayed feedback, right? So the biggest decisions you make up front are going to be like the land, crop type, variety, and then you wait, a long time, often years. So the farm you kind of design early on is the farm you'll be living with for a long time. As for perspective, it's all about building mature biological assets. Trees, vines, these things, gain value as they age and stabilize. So I think wealth compounds slowly but meaningfully once the system is established. Capital requirements are mainly front-loaded because of the reasons we discussed. So land costs are high because orchards need specific climates and conditions. Initial infrastructure is medium, planting, irrigation, protection, all these things. Ongoing costs are moderate once the system matures and can also go towards the lower side as well. Labor tends to be seasonal and specialized. I think complexity here is temporal. Fewer systems to manage, but timing matters a lot. Bad decision early can kind of lock in consequences for a decade or more. I think Path rewards people who think long term, kind of delay gratification and enjoy building something that improves over time. You want fast feedback or flexibility, it's going to feel frustrating. Outdoor produce is one of the more visible farming paths and one of the more demanding. I think core reality is seasonal intensity with fast feedback. You plant, you grow, you harvest, and you kind of find out quickly if your decisions worked or not. So the highs are high and the stress is concentrated. Asset perspective, it's a cash flow first path. Wealth doesn't compound primarily through land or long-lived assets. I think it comes from moving product week after week through markets. So speed and consistency here matter more. Capital-wise, land costs are high, so the produce wants good soil, good water, so these things matter. Initial infrastructure is medium, so irrigations, tools, kind of cold storage. Ongoing costs are also medium, but labor intensity is high during the season, so harvest weeks I think can be brutal. Complexity is operational, so you're coordinating planting schedules, harvest timings, labor, and sales kind of all at once. So I think this path kind of rewards people who find, planning and execution good, but if you enjoy if you enjoy intense season and clear feedback, I think this is going to be a good path for you. If you need the steadiness or this time pressure, I think this path can get overwhelming quite fast, right? And the failure modes come from burnout, taking out too many crops, or growing great food, but for the wrong market. So keep that in mind. Greenhouses are kind of like the farming system flagship product, I guess. The core reality is you're farming through systems, right? So instead of adapting to the weather, you're replacing it. It gives you control, but it gives you responsibility for everything that control replaces. Asset perspective, wealth here compounds through infrastructure and throughput. It's not land-led wealth necessarily, it's uptime-led wealth. So if the systems are running well, revenue flows. If they aren't, then the losses are going to add up quickly. Capital requirements are high because they're kind of like the highest of any path we've talked about. Land costs can be high because greenhouses need proximity to markets, utilities, and logistics. Initial infrastructure is extremely high, so structures, climate controls, lighting, automation, all these things matter. Ongoing costs are also high. Energy, maintenance, labor, and redundancy. Labor intensity is medium, but it's daily and system dependent. Complexity here is technical. There are more failure modes, more interdependencies, and more things that can break. Capital can substitute for experience early, but only until something I think unexpected happens. Most greenhouse failures don't come from growing bad crops. I think they come from underestimating operational costs, downtime, or building too much capacity before demand is real. I think if you enjoy designing systems and managing risks, this is a great path. But if you want simplicity or forgiveness, I think it can get unforgiving quite rapidly. Timber is kind of at the opposite end of the farming spectrum. I think core reality is time. You're farming on decades and there's very little daily pressure, very little urgency. From an asset perspective, it's about quiet compounding. So trees grow whether you watch them or not, land appreciates slowly. I think capital requirements are low relative to other farms paths. Like land costs are low because timber tolerates marginal soils in remote locations. Initial infrastructure is also minimal. Operating costs are also low, and labor intensity is periodic. I think complexity here isn't technical or operational, it's psychological. You have to be comfortable working on something that won't reward you soon, and there are long stretches where nothing appears to be happening. Most failures in timber and agroforestry don't come from hard work mistakes, they come from mismatched expectations, people needing income or engagement that the path simply doesn't provide. I think it pits people who think generationally. If you need momentum or feedback or cash flow, it's going to feel a little empty. Homesteading. So this is the lifestyle first path, So not about maximizing income, it's about maximizing independence. Value comes from what you don't have to buy, not what you sell. So I think this path favors diversity over optimization. You do many things at small scale and you trade efficiency for flexibility. That's not the flaw, it's a point. And homesteading fits many people who want autonomy, variety, and control over their daily lives more than they want a growth or scale. I think it's not a stepping stone to a farming business, actually. I think it's a destination. Treating it honestly, saves a lot of people from frustration and can give them a really nice and fresh approach to life. So I have made here kind of a land efficiency versus cash flow potential chart. So as a general reminder, cash flow is kind of what your outputs minus input cost is for the year. So imagine you already spent the capex. So capex is different. So you have bought the land, you have bought the infrastructure on the land, set up the building, all the kind of resources to manage your farm. Then every year, how much are you spending on the operational cost of the farm? So the electricity, the water, the labor, the feed, the fertilizers, right? So you take all those costs and you subtract them from how much money you make selling all the goods. And that is the cash flow. You can kind of think of it like a profit. Technically, it's not a profit kind of term, but I think simplistically we can think about it that way, right? So I think if you're looking to actually make a business and make money farming, this can be a helpful chart. If you're homesteading, obviously you just want a simple lifestyle. You want to have, kind of your residence set up with your farming. You're not looking to make money necessarily, right? So I have left out that row. But for any other type of farm, I think this can be kind of a useful starting point. It assumes a well-managed operation with market access. So if you're not going to put an effort, if you're not going to have a well-managed farm, you're not going to make any money. Doesn't matter, right? So keep that in mind as well. So I'm not going to go through every little part of this chart, but you can see how, separate types of farms are very different here. So one example I can give you is field crops, because once again, I had mentioned previously, it scales really largely, a lot of acres are involved to, make money. You can see that it takes, 1,000 or more acres here to make 100,000 or more of cash flow a year. So field crops, are commodity crops, things like soybeans, potatoes, corn, things like that. And then on the other side of the spectrum, you have greenhouses. You can make 100,000 or more cash flow a year with under an acre of greenhouses. So that's, a little interesting bit. And people might be thinking, oh man, what a huge difference. But remember, greenhouses involve a lot of capex upfront, a lot of infrastructure cost, a lot of system complexity, and recurring revenues as well. So yeah, interesting chart here. Feel free to pause the video and take a look for whatever kind of farm you have here. But I'm going to go into the next section, which is the kind of the land efficiency versus budget cash flow compatibility chart here. So this one, what I try to do is for your given budget, I try to give you an example farm of, and tell you if that kind of farm will be viable with that type of budget for the type of farm type that you want to have. Now, if it won't work, I'm going to put an X here. So for example, if you want to have a dairy production or an egg production farm, with $100,000, I mean, sorry, but the reality is, that's not enough money to get started. So keep in mind, this budget will include any type of loans that you have or loans that you take. So if you're doing that, add them or include them in the cost here, along with the kind of whatever your own kind of budget is for starting. If you're doing everything up front and you're funding everything yourself, then this is the budget that you would have in place. And so you can see, for livestock and dairy eggs, with 250 you can get started. I put like a warning sign if I think it's going to be tight. You have to be very frugal, very risk managed system in place, but it is possible to do, right? So with 250,000 for dairy and eggs, you can have like a small egg or micro dairy farm. I do think it's possible. One interesting row here is the field crops. So you can see that even with 500,000, I say that it's still misaligned without leases or aggregation. So it's not necessarily true. With 500,000, you can buy, 80 to 100 acres of this type of like land, farm the field crops, actually make a cash flow. But the reason this row I have put X's all the way through is because I honestly don't think that's enough acres, to sustain a farm and also build the proper infrastructure in place so you can weather a downturn. So you can, kind of, survive bad weather, survive any kind of things that come up, right? So field crops, I honestly think if you want a good field crop kind of farming infrastructure, you need more than 500,000. For the sake of simplicity, so I've left it out here. Another example you can see here is 100,000 won't work for greenhouses. I think you need a little bit more. At 250,000, you can get started with a 0.25 to 5 acre kind of greenhouse project here. So again, feel free to pause the video. I'm going to go to the next section, which is kind of the budget optimization failure mode capital sensitivity chart. So, a lot of X's here, but basically with this chart, I'm trying to tell you guys why people do these type of farming, right? So you might think from the previous two charts, like, why does anyone do field crops? Well, a lot of people, already have the land, and, there are subsidies in place, and they know that with the land, they can have a lot of scale efficiency in place, right? So actually, if you already have the resources and the farm set up, field crops are a very, risk averse type of farming because of the subsidies, because of the systems at place and all these things in place, right? Then I also have kind of an operational capital sensitivity column. What this column represents basically is once you have the farm up and running, how much continued cost of capital is needed to keep the farm functional or needed to kind of scale the farm a little bit. And you can see with field crops, it might take a lot of money to get started with the initial farm, but to scale, like kind of maintain the farm, keep it operationally managed and kind of continue scaling it, it doesn't need a lot more money. On the other hand, building more greenhouses, you're building separate structures into the land, so it takes a lot of money. It takes a lot of kind of, effort to get that and done and processed and kind of underdone. So, definitely a different kind of perspective into all these type of farmings. So you can see, obviously, like, why people go into these type of systems. Outdoor produce, I think, you have a lot of labor available nearby, so you can use the labor to generate the revenue. Greenhouses, is a business-driven strategy for cash flow, growth velocity. Timber is an inflation hedge. It really is. It stores your wealth, these type of lands, and it can be used as an inflation hedge. And then homesteading is expense annihilation. Of course, you're forging your own independence.
Now you know the farm model, and the next question is, how does it actually fit? So land isn't neutral, it shapes what's possible, and it's kind of definitely the next kind of piece here. I think zoning, water, soil, topography, these things matter more than inspiration, right? And so in the next video, I'll walk you through how to evaluate a property once you've chosen kind of the farming type and direction you want to go into. I think the difference between a good farm and a constant headache usually starts with the lot. If you found this video helpful or you learned something new, please feel free to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Thanks, and see you guys in the next one.